for 2021.
All right. Very good. Well, we are at the top of the hour, so we'll go ahead and get started. So thanks everyone for joining. Appreciate the attendance here, and congratulations everybody for wanting to learn something new today. So thank you so much for showing up. This event will feature Jeremy, who's going to be talking about how to make your home office more secure and teach you a few new things, tips and tricks that you can use right away. And thanks, Jeremy, for being our special guest today. Also want to thank Anna, who's on here from KEP Training. Anna, is there anything you want to say about KEP Training as we get started here?
I think we're, thanks Dave for the shout out. We definitely have some security classes, and one of that is Jeremy's OWASP application security class that he's going to be offering. So we can send out maybe a link for that when this is kicked off. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Anna. Appreciate the sponsorship for this event. And this is a Hardin County IT professionals event as well, but we've got a lot of other people from different forums and groups around Jack Henry, outside of Jack Henry. So you're very welcome. Thank you so much for joining. Jeremy, without further delay, I will go ahead and turn it over to you. But for all the participants here, there is the chat function in Teams here that you can use. So if you've got a comment or question, I will be watching the chat throughout the meeting. So if it's something worth calling out, I'll definitely call that out, questions and things. So you can ask questions throughout. It's meant to be very interactive. I think that pretty much covers it. So Jeremy, I will go ahead and turn it over to you. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, and thanks for having me today.
Absolutely.
And in my by training, I'm a security penetration tester, so I do security assessments and penetration tests for all sorts of different kinds of systems, mobile devices, networks, applications, and those sorts of things. So my background for this presentation is in doing those types of security assessments, especially through my company Ellipsis. And then of course also I teach at a lot of different places, colleges and SANS, and of course for KEP as well. And when doing some tests, especially last year for Ellipsis, I get a lot of requests to test web applications and mobile applications more recently, as companies are pushing a lot of their material out onto the web and also through mobile applications. And then I also still continue to test on site. And one of the things I was noticing in a lot of these security assessments and these security consulting engagements was the fact that the workforce is now highly distributed and they're working from their house. And then in addition to that, at the exact same time they're trying to get their work done, you've also got people who are going to school from home and going to college from home. And this is all happening on the home network simultaneously. And then of course you're still trying to live your regular life, and the home office is really quite something right now. And I gathered up a lot of the information that was learned and into this presentation, and I thought that it would be nice to share it, and hopefully you will get some tips out of this that will help you with your home office security. I like to start with authentication. I think this is one of the areas where folks can really see a lot of benefit with upgrading security right away, and it's fairly easy to do. So it's a lot of times it's within reach for a lot of us. To start with, the number one thing that we can do to increase our security with respect to logging into systems is to use the two-factor authentication. Now, this wasn't always available, or at least not for free, up until a few years ago when it became widespread, and it also became pretty much a commodity that was offered at no additional charge. And that happened probably about 5 years ago, up until around a couple of years ago. And if you look at what two-factor does, you'll notice that you still have to log in with your password, just like always. And that hasn't really changed. But in addition to that password, you also log in with something else. Sometimes the company will send you a code, perhaps they text it to you or email it to you. Sometimes you'll see authenticator applications on your phone where the authenticator app will show you a code on the screen, and you have to enter these codes in addition to entering your password. So a password's not good enough by itself. And regardless of which kind of two-factor authentication system you use, they are many, many times stronger than using a password alone, thousands of times stronger than using a password alone. Now, of course, like any security system, the different kinds of two-factor systems have different relative strengths relative to each other. Some are stronger than others, but setting all of that aside, any two-factor system is way more secure than just using a password by itself. So you definitely want to get on board with two-factor authentication. And the good news is that most of the services that you and your family use probably already offer it to you for free. You just have to opt in and take advantage of it. I know the social media outlets like Instagram and Facebook definitely offer it, Twitter as well. Also, your major social accounts and your email accounts, so things like Hotmail and Gmail and the G Suite, along with the Outlook and Yahoo, all offer free two-factor authentication. And then certainly your financial institution almost certainly offers it as well. If you use a site and you're not sure if they offer it, or you want to see the instructions on how to enable it for that particular site, I like the twofactorauth.org website. They have documented the instructions for turning on two-factor authentication for the various common services that are out there. So if you like some homework for tonight, you can list your top 5 accounts that you log into the most and start with those. Another thing that can help quite a bit is when you get the chance is try to move away from using passwords. Now, of course, this is not always going to be possible, but I'll give you an example. So I got a relatively inexpensive Android phone last year, and it has a PIN number by default for logging in, where you press the little buttons on the front. But it also has a fingerprint reader, so it can do fingerprint authentication instead of the PIN number. And it can do facial recognition instead of the PIN number. So I opted to do the fingerprint and the facial recognition features and turned off the PIN, which is effectively a password, entirely. So there's no way to log in with the PIN and unless you're in the emergency mode to get in. And I think that really helps with lost and stolen devices and things like that. If you really want to take it to the max level, we have the FIDO keys that are like the one seen here, where you physically have to plug the key into the computer system in order to be able to authenticate to the system. And again, within the space of passwordless authentication, that's kind of the top echelon of security. But again, all of these, regardless of their relative strength to one another, all of these different alternatives are going to be stronger than using passwords. And if you're like me, it's hard to remember all of these different passwords, and certainly we get distracted and we forget which password is for which site, and we don't want to reuse them, right? And so then we end up with 20 different passwords, and it starts to become a bit unmanageable. Password managers can go a long way towards helping you with this problem. They solve 2 big issues with using passwords, especially long passwords. First of all, it's difficult to remember all of the passwords, and password managers will take care of that for you. But the other issue is that it's hard to type them in, especially if the password is a long, relatively good password. It's going to be difficult to key that in using those little teeny tiny keyboards on the phone. And so the password manager can also enter the password for you, preventing you from typing the wrong password and getting locked out, or having a situation where the password is miskeyed, or you're using the one for the wrong site. So I really like the password managers. I've tested one password brand, and I've tested LastPass. I've heard there's some other good ones out there as well. Both of those were pretty good. I think for some of the Windows computers, it doesn't really matter which one you use. They all seem to work pretty well. LastPass seemed to work well on the Mac for what that's worth. So it doesn't seem to be a wrong answer in those major brands. Whatever one you like the most is the one for you. One of the things that we have to be careful with is really need to guard your email. It turns out that the email account is pretty much the key to the kingdom, or at least the start for a lot of the hacks that are going on nowadays. So you get hit with phishing attacks, of course, you're already aware of those, and they tend to come via email. But one of the things that hackers really value is being able to get into your email account, because when they're trying to get around some of these advanced authentication systems, email is pretty much the key. Think about it. If you ever need to recover your password, how do you do that? Well, typically, they're going to send you something to your email, a reset link or a code or something else that you would receive via email in order to get around the authentication system. And guarding your personal email accounts is really more important than ever. You want to be sure that these accounts definitely have that two-factor authentication that we talked about earlier. Now, when it comes to passwords, there's all sorts of characteristics they have. There's password rotation, how often you change the password. There is password complexity. Does it have symbols and numbers and blood types and hieroglyphs in it and all those things? And there's how long the password is. And so you might say, well, what makes a really good password? And I have to balance that with being able to actually use the silly thing, right? Well, it turns out that complexity and password rotation don't help nearly as much as was once thought. And that makes sense because you go back to the history of passwords, and it used to be that computers couldn't hold very much characters. So you would have passwords that could be, maybe 8 characters long, and that's about all you got. Well, of course, nowadays computers can hold passwords that are 64 characters or 100 characters and really not think much of it. So we're not really restricted to these really short passwords anymore like we used to be. And so we don't need those compensating controls like complexity as much as we used to need those now that we can have good passwords. And so let's take a look at, should you have a complex password that is really hard to guess, but I can still remember it because it's short enough? Or should we have a gigantic password that's super easy to remember because it's just some common words and phrases that I put together that I can always remember easily, and not really have the complexity that would prevent me from using such a long password? Well, if we compare, when we double the password length, we'll take from 8 characters, which is a very common length, and we'll double that to 16 characters. What happens? Well, we get a password that's about 100 billion times stronger against guessing attacks. Well, how about if we took a super awesome password, like 32 characters? Like, I think we'd all agree, like, that's fabulous, right? Well, let's compare a really simple 32 character password that has nothing but letters in it. And we'll compare that to one that has maximum complexity. We got symbols, we got numbers, we got uppercase and lowercase, right? It's just impossible to type. And I don't even know where some of those symbols are on the iOS keyboard. I still haven't found them yet. So what does that buy us? Well, it's about 10,000 times stronger. Well, 10,000 is a pretty big number. So that is stronger, but relatively speaking, it just doesn't matter, right? It's really all about how long the password is. Because if I double my password length, I get 100 billion times more stronger. If I add a bunch of crazy symbols in there, then I get about 10,000 times stronger. So sure, complexity helps, no question. The math bears it out. It does make a difference. But is it a statistically significant difference? And not really. As long as your password is at least 16 characters, probably should be a little longer than that, but if it's at least 16 characters and you can remember the thing, and use it and type it, then you are actually a lot better off than if you use a standard 8-character password that has all the fun little symbols and stuff like that in it. And then if you combine a good password that's about 16 characters long and you combine that with that 2-factor authentication, now we're really getting somewhere.
Hey, Jeremy,
Yes.
while you're talking about passwords, one thing that I learned a little bit about recently were these rainbow tables and how much time, while we're all at work doing great things, how much time other people in the world are spending trying to figure out your passwords and running heavy machinery and computers to try to figure out your password and playing into the length. Can you speak to that at all in terms of what's going on with the rainbow tables and how the password length, how that comes into play and how important that is?
Sure, absolutely. So, a part of that responsibility is on the application itself to use proper password storage algorithms. And that's definitely something we cover in the training class in depth. And so we would certainly teach the developers how to take care of their side of that. The other part of it, the part that we as users can do something about, is to make sure that, again, that we are really using those 16 plus character passwords. A lot of my passwords are really more so around the 20, 21, 22 character length. And you might say, well, that's got to be annoying. Well, again, I'm using Password Manager, and the Password Manager takes care of typing in 75% of the passwords I use. So, net, I'm actually doing less password typing than I would if I had an 8-character password with no manager. But the rainbow tables that you spoke of, they go for the masses, right? They're going for the normal distribution curve, and they're going to focus on passwords that are somewhere between 8 and 12 characters in length, because most passwords are between 8 and 12 characters in length. And so they're going to put their massive computing resources into building rainbow tables, which is really kind of a fancy way of building just a lookup dictionary of passwords that I've already computed in advance. And they're really going to hyper focus on those password lengths. So it's not that you couldn't build a lookup table or a rainbow table for 20 character passwords. Of course you could. You just need a whole lot of computers. But it's just that it's unlikely that a hacker is going to invest in going after passwords that are really long, because the payoff isn't very good.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Now, when it comes to backups, most folks know they should back up their computer. Unfortunately, especially after they lose some information, then they really know they should back up their computer. And I just this past week, literally it's like 3 days ago, which was kind of coincidence for this presentation, I had someone who asked me to recover some data for them, and they had lost their server to CryptoLocker, and they had yanked the cord out of the wall before the drive was completely encrypted, but they lost the OS, and now they can't get to the data. And so certainly that old adage holds that backups are critical. But one of the things we have to be careful of is you really want to make sure you have two different kinds of backups. So first of all, do automated backup. Make it easy, because if it's hard to back up, honestly, we get busy and we're probably just not going to do it. So you want something that, like Windows backup built into Windows 10 or OS X Time Machine built into the Macs, that is just going to take care of it. It's the easy button, right? Automatically going to back up whenever you plug the drive in, and they automatically have file storage and take care of encryption and all those sorts of things. And so that's really great. But you also want to make sure you back up your backup. And what I mean by that is make a second copy that's backing up, say, maybe to a cloud provider, so that you have your on-site backup and you also have your off-site backup. And that way, if you have a problem at your house, you don't lose your backup. The on-site backup should be a drive that you plug into your computer. You don't want it to be always connected to the network. You want it to be what we call air-gapped, meaning it's just unplugged, except for when you're doing the backup, of course. And the reason for that is that you don't want to have CryptoLocker software that jumps over and just encrypts the backups while it's encrypting your hard drive, and then you end up losing everything. For the cloud storage, one of the things you can do is what's called zero knowledge encryption, meaning that you just encrypt the data before you stick it into the cloud. And that way, your data is already encrypted before it ever arrives at someone else's computer, and you don't have to worry about them snooping around in your stuff. And there's a few services that offer that. And then, of course, you can also do it manually if you wanted to manually encrypt your data and then move the backup over.
Yeah, one quick comment on that, Jeremy. I know we got a lot of folks on here from Jack Henry, some people from outside of Jack Henry. Be sure you understand what the policy is at your company for using flash drives. I know Jack Henry, we have a pretty strict policy about that. So if you're doing something like that, I think it would pertain more to your personal computer and things like that. Things are getting backed up by Jack Henry if you're using shared drives that are available. They're getting backed up already and things like that. So you wouldn't need to worry about that, but just wanted to call that out.
Yeah, and that's definitely great if while you're on the work network, if again, that easy button, right? If work takes care of that for you and you don't have to worry about it, you're much more likely to survive an event without really even, sweating it that much compared to companies that got hit like Maersk and stuff, where the backups weren't really automated and they weren't really backing up as quickly as they needed, and kind of got into a pickle. So. Well, encryption is definitely a tricky topic because you got so much complexity in this. And I like types of encryption that are more automated, that basically are just going to work. They're called transparent encryption systems, meaning you don't really have to think about it to get them to work. They just sort of do their job in the background. And a couple of these available for Windows, Mac, and Android is the full disk encryption. You have to have Windows, you do have to have Windows 10, and I believe you have to have a certain level of license to use the really cool BitLocker features, but they do have full disk encryption regardless of which version of Windows 10. Mac OS X has full disk encryption natively in all versions, and as well as the recent versions of Android. Now you might be saying, well, you didn't mention iOS. Well, iOS has had automated full disk encryption from the factory for several versions. So if you have iOS, you're good to go. If for Windows, Mac, and Android, you actually need to opt in or turn it on. And that's the main reason to call those three out, is you need to go check the box to enable the full disk encryption. And full disk encryption is great for protecting against lost or stolen devices. Now, it doesn't help as much if you're using a computer and the computer is turned on and you're logged in, because at that point, the disk is decrypted. For that, you need something like Windows encrypting file system, where you can go to folders on your hard drive and you can check the box to say, encrypt the content of this particular folder. What that does is it encrypts automatically, transparently in the background, that anything that goes in that folder. And so if you're using a Windows computer, which allows multiple different people to log into the same machine, the other people who are logging into that same computer would not be able to read the contents of that folder. And again, we mentioned before, for cloud storage, the zero knowledge encryption is the safest way to deal with the cloud. Because again, the cloud is somebody else's computer, right? And if you encrypt before you put your stuff into the cloud, then you sort of take the whole cloud out of play as far as being a problem with sharing too much information. Now, browsers are the main piece of software that we use to connect. At least 54% of our interactions with the internet are over the web. And whether that be through an application on your phone or through a traditional browser. And so you want to make sure you're using HTTPS in order to secure that connection. Otherwise, it's relatively easy for folks to be able to read the information that's going back and forth. But it's hard to remember. And also, if you're like me, like I don't really type, https://www.google.com/ right? I just type in google.com, and then the browser takes care of the rest. Well, technically, when you just type in the domain name and you hit enter, you're actually technically using HTTP. And if the site doesn't bother to push you up to HTTPS, you'll be stuck unencrypted and sharing your information as you're broadcasting out across the Wi-Fi. So the best solution that I found for this is the HTTPS Everywhere plugin. And the way it works is it just monitors your connections locally. It doesn't share the information. And whenever it sees you browsing out to the internet, it'll just add the S onto HTTP to make it HTTPS for you. And it does that before you make the initial connection. So you're already surfing over HTTPS, even if you just type in domain names like I do. It's not available for Safari was the only downside I found, but there was an application in the App Store that seemed to try to mimic the behavior, and I think it cost $2 when I researched it last. Now, a lot of folks will say, well, I'm using a VPN, and so I'm good to go, right? I don't have to worry about that HTTPS stuff. And VPN is really awesome for protecting the highly vulnerable Wi-Fi connection, that initial connection you're making to the Wi-Fi router. But you have to remember the packet, the network traffic is going a really, really long way, and it's going far beyond just that first connection to the Wi-Fi. So the VPNs do a great job of protecting you between where you are and where the VPN is. What happens after the data goes through the VPN and pops out the other side? Hard to say, right? So we still want to get into the habit of using HTTPS connections because you want to protect what we call end to end, or all the way from your computer all the way to the server and then back again. VPNs are great. They do help with a lot of problems, but they don't necessarily protect you all the way. Now, I mentioned the word patching, and I think most folks, fairly enough, would think that I'm about ready to say the most important thing to do with patching is to make sure you patch everything. And actually, that's not the case. With patching, the most important thing for you to do is to uninstall as much as you possibly can. We all collect a lot of extra apps that we had the best of intentions, but honestly, we never really used them on our phone. We have all sorts of applications on our computers that we used them when we needed them, and then we just kind of forgot about it and didn't really ever take them back off the computer. And this happens to everybody. So the best thing you can do today is look at the software that's installed on your phone and also on your computer, and just remove the stuff you don't need. And that is the best patch of all. And that'll reduce what we call the attack surface, meaning that there's just not as much stuff to go after on the device. And it really does strengthen the security of that system. Then, of course, there's also devices that tend to get on our network that we don't think about patching as well. We purchase televisions and Blu-ray players and all sorts of various, TV in a box type appliances. Like I have a lot of Fire Sticks, and I know folks like all the alternatives to the Fire Sticks as well. They're all very popular. So those all need to be patched as well. And so you kind of have to walk around the house and just double check that you're patching everything. Or if you don't need it on the network anymore and you really don't use that Blu-ray player anymore, you can just unplug it, and that's the easiest thing to do. Now with Windows 10 and Mac OS X, automatic updates should be enabled by default. You just want to double check that. But that used to be a pretty big deal, was to whenever you're acting as IT support for your family, is to just while you're in there, make sure that the automatic updates are enabled. The software that you have installed on Windows, that can be a bit of a problem. Windows Update will update a few Microsoft products, and it'll update Windows. That's it. It won't update anything else on your computer. So you may need a helper application. I checked out several. There was like a top 10 list of them out there, and I looked at Patch My PC for Windows, and it worked all right. And it had a pretty decent free version, and it had a paid version that did some more stuff. And what I noticed was that was very helpful for listing out all the applications on my Windows box and telling me if a patch was available. And that once I knew that a patch was available, I could just go ahead and patch that software. The paid versions of those kind of Patch My PC products in that general family, the paid versions had a tendency to actually go ahead and install the patch for you. And I think that's mainly what you were paying for, was the convenience of not having to patch it yourself. And that's a pretty cool feature, might even be worth it. Also, don't forget about your router and your Wi-Fi access points. Be surprised how many folks keep their computers pretty well patched, but they forget about that that router that you got in the closet back there, and that needs to be patched pretty frequently as well. I use Ubiquiti brand products, and I think they're pretty ordinary in that they come out with a new patch at least every quarter. And so you're getting at least 4 times a year with those. Android is a little bit of a pickle sometimes because the mobile operators, the folks that issue the phones, they don't always want to support Android for very long. It has to do with the business model. Apple makes money whenever you use or purchase in the App Store. So you buy an application, or you buy something for the application, or you buy something while you're using the application, they're getting 30%. And that's where they make a good chunk of their money. For that reason, Apple is going to make sure that device lasts forever, just about right. There's still iPhone 6s out there that are supported even to this day. Android ecosystem doesn't work that way, and the money is made on the buy. So selling a new device is paramount, and they don't support the devices in some cases for as long as would be reasonably expected. And so you end up losing the ability to get patches, or you get patches really late, like 90 days after Google puts the patch out. You're just now getting the mobile operator to actually let you download it. And so the Android tends to be a problem. What I found was the best fix for this is to buy phones that are Android Enterprise recommended. And what that means is that amongst a whole lot of other things that they have to do, that phone manufacturer has promised Google that they will support your security patches for a couple of years to give you a chance to get all the way through your phone's life cycle with full patch support. Android Enterprise recommended link is available at the end of this presentation, so don't worry, I have all these links for you.
Hey, Jeremy, there's a quick question in the chat.
Sure.
Which is more secure, Microsoft apps on your computer or using Google Workspace and their emails and applications? Anything you can share there or thoughts?
Yeah, more and more the Microsoft apps you're using on your computer are really just back-ended by Office 365 Cloud anyway. So it's starting to kind of converge, right, to where it's almost like, should I be using Google's online services or should I be using Microsoft's online services? And Microsoft is pushing hard to really get everybody to be either on O365 or backed up by O365, which means it's kind of becoming a moot point in a sense. But I think as long as you're using a provider that has reasonable controls, that's really more so the key is your provider, whether it be Google or Microsoft, do you have the two-factor authentication enabled? They both support it. So with those brands, you could use two-factor. Are they going to encrypt your contents when it gets into the cloud? And I believe both of those providers have options for that, especially with G Suite and the Enterprise O365 offerings. And are they backing up, or do you need to do the backups? And so it's not so much, I think, about this brand or that brand, but it's about going back and making sure you have all the reasonably expected security controls in place. The top 20 controls of basics would be authentication, encryption, and backups. But
so Jeremy,
both
this
major
is my
brands.
question.
Sure.
So I keep all my apps on my computer, even though I have Office 365. Should I be using it in the cloud and not on my downloaded?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
It really is all about, do you have the security controls in place? So if you're going to keep it on
after this.
yeah. So if you keep it on your local computer, you just want to double check that you have you're doing your own local air-gapped backups and your encryption's turned on and you have two-factor enabled and those sorts of things. In some sense, you can possibly be maybe a little bit more secure by using a local laptop that maybe never leaves the house, kind of a situation, and if you have that sort of convenience. But really, it's really all starting to converge, and it's about making sure that you have the controls regardless of the situation you're in. Now, when it comes to using Wi-Fi, which we all do all the time, you want to be cognizant of where you are when you're using the Wi-Fi. Now, if you're just surfing around and hitting the web, yeah, it may not make that much difference what network you're on. But if you're doing anything important, so certainly you might think about, writing those confidential documents, or you're doing some banking or those sorts of things. When you start to get into stuff that you quote know is starting to be sensitive, then you want to make sure that you're going to go ahead and either connect to a network you trust to do that you would do banking on, like your home network is probably one you trust fairly confidently, or that's where the VPN really can help out a lot, because the most exposed point of your connection to the web is that initial connection. It's between your computer and that Wi-Fi access point, and that's where most of the risk comes into play. If you can take that out of play, you're way more secure, even if the security isn't perfect the rest of the way. The VPN really secures that initial connection between you and the Wi-Fi, because it's basically setting up an encrypted tunnel between your computer and the VPN server, and that's going to include that Wi-Fi connection. So that's where the VPN comes into play, is when you're out there on those untrusted Wi-Fi networks and you're just thinking, this is a little sketchy. I mean, do I really want to be like trading stocks at Panera? Probably not, right? Now, again, we all not only use Wi-Fi, but we also pretty much all of us run our own Wi-Fi's, at least at our house. And there's a ton of settings and configurations and all kinds of complicated setups we could talk about. But really, the basic things will get you 80% of the way there. So making sure that your SSID, or the name of your network, is a fairly unique value will keep devices that are remembering to connect to McDonald's from accidentally connecting to your router because they have the same name. So you don't really want to have a common name. You want to have something a bit off. Also, set your security mode to WPA2 personal and choose the AES algorithm. And it'll be listed something like WPA2 AES, or in the picture of this Linksys here on the slide, you can see that they actually have it as two separate boxes. Then you want to disable Wi-Fi protected setup. Sometimes this will be called WPS. You just want to uncheck that box. And this last one is kind of a take it or leave it, but if you have devices at your house that are fairly new, you can actually just use the 5 gigahertz band and just turn the 2.4 gigahertz off. Now, old devices won't have 5 gigahertz antennas in them, so if you got some stuff that's like 10 years old, you'll still need the 2.4 gigahertz. But for devices that can use 5 gigahertz, the signal doesn't go out so far away from your house. It doesn't really go out, as far into the yard and so forth. So you're not broadcasting quite as much distance as you are with the 2.4 gigahertz signal, which tends to go on down the street just a bit. And also, 5 gigahertz is faster, so win-win. Now, this part here gets a little bit complicated because we're starting to talk about router architecture. But there, again, it's the simple things will tend to get us 80% of the way towards really awesome security, even if we don't necessarily have the equipment or funding to take it all the way to enterprise level. So let's look at some stuff that we can do at home that makes a big difference, even if it's not, quite up to data center standards. First of all, our routers nowadays have a tendency to actually be not just a router. So you got this blinky box and it has a switch in it. It's got a Wi-Fi access point with some antennas popping out the top. And it also has all these different servers and services running inside. So let's assume that we're using one of these kinds of devices. Well, if you're like most folks, your internet service provider will bring a blinky box to your house that indeed does all those cool things. And so somehow or whether or another, there's a connection in your yard that goes to your house, and then you have a connection to your router. We're going to call the ISP's router the exterior router, and you'll see why here in just a minute. And so by default, all your stuff is connected to the ISP's router. Well, if we run down to the store and we pick up our own router and bring it home, what we could do is we can plug our router into the back of the exterior router. Well, that allows us to actually plug all of our stuff onto our own router that we own. And that can be a big deal because the exterior router is owned by the ISP. They know the password, they have access to it, they have back doors into it so that they can service and maintain it. They're responsible for the patching of that router, and who knows if they're keeping up with the patching or not. Just depends on the brand. That router might get old because they don't want to replace them until they really have to because they're buying millions of these things, right? And so there's all sorts of problems that can happen with this exterior router, and maybe we don't want to put all our eggs in that basket. So if we have our own router, we know we can keep it patched. We know that we're the only ones that knows the passwords, and we can set up the security on it to be really good. Also, this interior router is not connected to the internet because it's actually going upstream to the exterior router, the ISP router. And so it doesn't have to take all those constant attacks directed at all of the exterior routers all around the world, which makes our devices a whole lot safer. And really, we haven't done anything fancy at all. We've just purchased our own router and used it in between the exterior and all of our devices. Now, that's not to say that there can't be some technical complications, and I've certainly helped some folks set some of this type of stuff up. But for the most part, this is one of the ways that has the best security return on investment. So for the dollars spent and the trouble made, how much more security do you get? And adding your own router into the mix actually has a really good security return on investment. And once you have that set up and you've worked out all the kinks, that gives you some options that you didn't have before. Now, if you go get a vendor device, like I used to have a Vonage, went back when I used to have a home phone, and I could plug the Vonage into the exterior router and not have to have it on my network with all my stuff. And so my stuff was over here, and the vendor device, or in my case, the Vonage, was over there, and the two shall not meet. So that was comforting. Plus, if we add Wi-Fi into the mix, and most of these routers do have Wi-Fi built in, so they would look something like this diagram. Now we can have all the wireless devices connecting to the appropriate network. The stuff that doesn't belong in our house can all connect up to the Wi-Fi on the ISP router, and all of our phones and other gizmos that we own can connect to our personal Wi-Fi on our personal router, keeping everything segmented. DNS is another one of the magical services that's going to be inside of that ISP box. And DNS is critical for applications and acts as the service that supports the web. It's the most important service on the web, perhaps even more so than any other service. And the way it works is like this. Your computer really doesn't actually know those domain names or where they're at. So you're trying to search, and so you're bringing up your favorite search engine, and you're bringing up duckduckgo.com. And the computer's like, I don't really know what that means. So it takes the name duckduckgo.com and it sends it over to the DNS server. And the DNS server has a giant database of IP addresses and names, and it connects those two together. So the DNS server says, yeah, I know where DuckDuckGo is. It's at this IP address over here. And it sends it back to your computer. Your computer's like, awesome, now I know where DuckDuckGo is. And then it goes out and it browses to DuckDuckGo and brings up your search engine, and now you can search the web. Now, a DNS sinkhole technology has a little bit of a twist. For normal sites, it'll work exactly like we just explained. But for sites that are on the naughty list, when that domain name goes out to a DNS server that has sinkhole capabilities, the DNS server says, oh, wait a minute, that is on the bad list. And instead of returning back the real IP address, the sinkhole returns back all zeros, which is a fake address that doesn't exist. And so your computer says, I can't get there. I don't know how to get to that site. And it just stops trying, and you'll never reach that site. Well, this technology is perfect for augmenting our application security. And it works really well in houses because we can put it on our router, and all the different devices that are all around the house that are using the router now inherit this protection just because they can't get out of the house unless they go through the sinkhole. So one of the sinkholes I found that was easiest to get started with was OpenDNS. And they have a couple different free offerings. They have Family Shield and Home. And so Family Shield is the set it and forget it, super easy. You don't have to really configure much except for putting their IP addresses of their DNS servers into the appropriate box in your router's settings. And so you would log into your router and you would find the DNS server boxes and you would type their IPs in, save the settings, you're done. Now, if you are wanting a little bit more selection and choice, you can sign up or register for an account on OpenDNS Home, which is still free as of this week. I just checked it, and it's been free for like 5 years, and they're still offering it for free. They do have a charge for businesses, but when you register, you're able to log into a console, and in this console, you can actually choose the categories of items. I think they call them themes that you want to allow or block, and then OpenDNS will make their sinkholing decision based on your choices. If you really want to get fancy, you can actually install a Pi-hole DNS in your house. Those things are awesome, and I've actually got a whole different presentation on how that works and how to get that set up. But that's where you would be running your own DNS sinkhole server, and of course that's a bit more advanced topic. Now, when it comes to privacy, one of the biggest problems we have nowadays is that all these different devices that we're purchasing, they actually tend to collect a lot of data about us, and more of them that I've checked out are doing it by default. I'll give you an example. I bought a television last year. It was a major name brand, so it was a name brand you would have heard of. It wasn't something kind of odd. And by default, it was tracking the channels that I would pull up and watch on the TV. I don't know who it's reporting to, but I would have to imagine they're collecting the data to be able to market a whole lot better to me. And so, and incidentally, the way I knew they were doing it is through the Pi-hole, but again, another story. And so one of the things I did was I just went into the TV settings and I drilled down maybe, somewhere between 65 and 84 menus deep. And when I finally got to the bottom, there was an actual button you could click and you could just turn all that off. But because the devices are opting you into the data collection, I think most people just don't think anything of it and they don't actually go in there and opt out. And so I think that's an important thing to point out for privacy. If you really want to surf the internet anonymously, VPN may not necessarily get the job done 100%. They're definitely a big help, don't get me wrong. But also, even if your VPN is the best of breed and they're honoring your privacy 100%, they can't protect you from things like cookies and other little snippets of tracking data that are stored on your browser. So if you really want to be anonymous while on the internet, you really have to use something like a Tor browser because it'll drop all the cookies at the end of your browsing session and just delete everything. Brave and Focus started to make some inroads in this area, but there's already been some complaints that Brave browser is accepting whitelists from companies if they're willing to pay to have their name added to the allowed list. So choose your own adventure. Now, what I'd like to do is I'll open it up for some questions, but a couple of things to let you know. So first of all, if you were interested in security services, just reach out to me directly at this email address after the presentation, and I'll give you a hand with that, no problem. Also, my phone number's on here. But take note of this URL. So if you go to tinyurl.com, and sorry, I think that should say InfoSec Meetup. I apologize. I think I got the wrong link on there, and that's my fault. Let me fix that for you real quick. So it's this link here. I made a new blog, and what I did is I loaded up all the content from this presentation on there, and then I also went ahead and put the references because you can see there's pages and pages and pages of references. And so I went ahead and put all that out there at tinyurl.com InfoSec Meetup. And what you'll see when you get to that URL is you'll see this blog called Resources and Publications. And I've got the home network security tips right there as the very first download once you arrive over at the blog on ellipsisinfosec.com. All right, so with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Jeremy, do you actually use those browsers that you mentioned on that slide, or do you use them part of the time for some things, and then other things that you're doing when you're browsing the internet, you use something more conventional like Chrome or something like that? What's your behavior?
Yeah, definitely more the latter. So I'm kind of a more of a practical person. So when I'm doing like let's just say, so I teach a lot on Google Classroom, and like tomorrow morning I got a class, and I'll just use Chrome browser when I'm teaching the class because Google Classroom works awesome in Chrome and Google Meet works awesome in Chrome, right? So everything's going to work and it's going to be great. And so I'll definitely use Chrome for that. And then I tend to use Safari when I'm just goofing on the web because the thing is that that's the default browser in my Mac, and it's just the easiest. And then whenever I'm wanting to make sure that got the best security hygiene, I use Tor. So pretty much that's the only 3 browsers that I have. If you can see my screen, there's Safari, Tor, and Chrome right there, back to back to back, right? And those are the only 3 that I use. And then I have Tor on my phone, and so I use Firefox Focus for just ordinary everyday browsing on my phone, and then I use Tor if I need that extra security, and I do the same thing, so basically on Android as well. All right, what other questions do we have? All right, well, in that case, I'll leave you all with this link. I can leave this slide up with the tiny URL, and you all can head out there to the ellipsisinfosec.com site and pick up the tips. And inside of that guide, not only is all the notes from the presentation, but I think I had around 25 references that I referred to, and all of those references are out there in that document as well. All right, well, thank you very much for having me today. I really appreciate it. And appreciate Anna for you setting this up, and Steve for you hosting.
Thanks, Jeremy. I appreciate it. And I actually wrote down a lot of notes because, yeah, there's some things I'm doing wrong.
Yeah, well, it's a lot, right? It's a lot of information, and certainly I don't think anyone's going to get it all done in a day. But I can tell you personally, I kind of set out on this journey in my own house just to try to really figure out, like, how would I secure the house? And that's a lot of that is what ended up in this presentation, actually. And it took me about 6 months. So I don't think it's something that any of us can really do instantly. But right now, what else you got to do, right? Can't go anywhere, so might as well learn some stuff and fix up the home.
Well, I've actually opened up ransomware because I had a trainer. We were doing a project for Papa John's, and he was expecting a delivery for a bunch of books, right? So we could take it to the class. And I got an email that looked like it was like for shipping. And so I thought it was something he sent to me, opened it, and it just, that was it. That was pretty much the end of my computer. Yeah.
Ouch.
Yeah, it was painful.
Yeah.
So that happened.
Sometimes you just got to burn them and start over, right?
Yeah, it was an older computer, and it just, yeah, but lesson learned. I mean, as much as I attend events and stuff, I completely thought it was something he sent to me.
Yep. Yeah, it's the phishing is tough to avoid. Like, because you have to be perfect every single time you click, right? And so you can be perfect 99 times in a row, and then the 100th time you click on something, and
boy, did it go fast.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it runs at the speed of electricity.
Fast.
It does. Yeah. And they're smart enough to start with the data that really matters, the My Documents folder in Windows, and basically the home directory of the Mac. And so, yeah, the antivirus can help a little bit, but its antivirus right now is catching around 80 to 82%. So there's still a pretty big gap when it comes to that advanced malware. Definitely the backups, air-gapped backups is key.
Yeah, I was lucky I didn't lose that much data that I didn't have already saved, but I remember messaging a security friend of mine, because obviously I have a lot, and his two words, he goes, "You're screwed," and I was like, "Oh, that's not good."
Yeah. It happens. It happens, right? It's very unfortunate. It's very frustrating too, because you feel like they're taking advantage of you, and so there's also a lot of like emotion tied up in it as well, where
Well,
you
because they're
just
asking
feel,
for money too.
yeah, the whole
Money
thing
to
is
get back.
slimy. So, but it happens, and it'll happen to the best of us. So have those backups for sure.
Yeah, and don't be so quick to hit skip when one of your apps is asking, do you want to turn on two-factor authentication? Because just taking that few moments to set that up can really save you a big headache. So maybe, hopefully, everybody's walking away from this with kind of a new lens in terms of security and protecting yourself. Because to Anna's point, it can take one click and it's really going to ruin your day or week or month. So just maybe consider that. What are the things that are not as secure as they are right now in your life? And maybe take a few of these tips and look at implementing those. And they just seem to take a few minutes, some of them.
Yeah, definitely. One of the companies I was happiest with about offering the two-factor, but also the most disappointed with because they didn't really advertise it, was Amazon Store. So Amazon Web Services has had two-factor for like, I don't know, 8 years or whatever, right? I've been using it, seems forever. But Amazon Store only got two-factor just a couple of years ago. It's fairly new. I mean, certainly Microsoft and Google and Facebook and LinkedIn beat them to the punch, but they did get around to putting it in, and it is there. They just weren't awesome about telling everybody about it. And so one of the things you'd want to do is, while you're setting up your two-factor authentication tonight for all your favorite sites, is don't forget about the Amazon Store.
Jeremy, I have a quick question. So for somebody like me that's kind of a novice, where do I go to find the two-factor on a site? Do I go to like Amazon and click on, where would I go?
Yeah, so twofactorauth.org does have the instructions for the popular sites, and they've done a really good job of documenting the instructions. But 9 times out of 10, what you would do is you would log into the site, whatever it may be. It could be your bank or whatever, and click on your account. So usually it's in the top right corner on most sites. It'll have your picture or your icon or something. So click on your account and then go to settings. Normally on most sites, two-factor will be enabled in the settings of your account.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I just dropped the link in there for anybody who's interested on twofactorauth.org. Okay. Very good. Well, Jeremy, thank you so much. Excellent job on the presentation. Thank you so much for your time and energy on this one. And thanks everybody for joining today. And hope you all have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Thanks, Steve, for putting this together too.
No problem. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.